Hello, boys and girls. I'm back. This is Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, a contributor to Fox News, welcoming you to the first episode of the Ben Domenech Podcast, brought to you by Fox News. This is going to be a series of conversations with newsmakers, intellectuals, interesting authors, musicians, comedians, and more. People who have things to say about the country and the moment that we're living through. It seems to me that there are a number of different dynamics in this country worthy of discussion and that require a lot longer of a conversation than what you can get in just a brief cable news hit. That's the kind of space that we want to have here on this podcast, where we can have those conversations at length, delve into the different issues involved, get to know the different people that we're talking to, and reflect a bit on the different aspects of this country in this particular high-strung, very tense, very tribalist moment. We're going to talk about populism. We're going to talk about the future and the past of the American right and left. We're going to talk about race in America. That's the subject of our first episode today. We're going to talk about aspects of our culture, both the high culture and the low culture, what it means for us as Americans as we see them develop. And we'll do that both with the creative side of things, the business side of things, and the people who comment and analyze this for you on Fox News with regularity. If you're listening to this, I don't need to tell you that America has been getting a pretty bad rap as of late. There are a lot of people running it down from without and from within. And those are people who I think are fundamentally wrong. I believe in America. I believe in its past and in its future, in its promise and in what it offers uniquely in the history of the world. The essence of American optimism is founded in a belief that the world we pass on can exceed the one we inherited. We are not prisoners of an all-encompassing destiny, and neither are our children. This is not a uniquely American inclination, mind you, but a human one. But not all cultures acknowledge or honor it. It was here in America where such an experience was uniquely understood from our inception, in our creed. We create as we were created and know all who are created have worth. And so they have an equal claim to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. We're going to be talking to a lot of interesting people in the coming weeks and months. I hope that you will go along with us on this conversation. And I appreciate the folks at Fox News for having the ability and the interest in hosting these conversations. Today, we'll be talking to Shelby Steele. He's an author and a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He's the son of a Southern-born black truck driver who left school in third grade to work the fields. He would marry a white woman in 1944, which is not exactly the kind of things that a lot of people are known for. It led all of her siblings to abandon her. He talked recently to the Wall Street Journal in an interview that I encourage you to look up. Mr. Steele laments that liberal America is, quote, still not ready to talk realistically and frankly about race. What is obvious to him, he says, and obvious to millions of Americans, is the fact that America has made more moral progress in the last 60 years regarding race than any nation, country, or civilization in history, unquote. He describes this progress as, quote, miraculous, and cites his own life as proof. He was born into a deeply segregated America where every aspect of life was racially calibrated. In 1946, when his mother showed up at a Chicago hospital in full labor, nurses ushered her into the maternity ward. When her husband arrived after parking the car, the nurses realized the baby wasn't going to be white. They pushed her into the elevator, which descended to the basement where the colored maternity ward was. This was where Mr. Steele and his identical twin brother, Claude, were born. Mr. Steele encountered plenty of discrimination in his youth. He couldn't be a paper boy because they wouldn't let black kids ride a bike through white neighborhoods at 6 a.m. He couldn't be a caddy on a golf course. He couldn't wash dishes at the local Greek restaurant because people would see his black hands on the plates. He couldn't work at JCPenney because he couldn't be seen laying clothes out on display. He couldn't go to the schools he wanted because all the schools were segregated. And yet he, too, believes in America. Coming up, we'll hear from our guest today, Shelby Steele. Shelby Steele is one of the most interesting intellectuals in America today. He's also someone who's spoken over the course of his career to a number of the issues that currently find themselves at the center of Americans' discussion about race in this country, about the history of the nation, and about the kind of nation that we want to have moving forward. I recently had a conversation with a very intelligent friend of mine, Emily Ekins, currently the research director over at the Cato Institute, about the fact that she and a group of her friends had gotten together to discuss Shelby Steele's 2006 book, White Guilt, which has an enormous, I think, lesson to teach us in this current time. He is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and he is joining us here today. Thank you so much, Shelby, for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
I had back and forth with my friend Emily about what kind of questions she wanted me to ask you. And so I hope that you'll forgive a little bit of book club intrusion onto our conversation today. But one of the questions that really was front of mind, I think, for them was about how to wrestle with an America that has gone beyond recognizing the evils of racism to the point where race now seems to be used in a weaponized way against our fellow Americans.
Absolutely. As I've written about in that book as well, there was a moment in the 60s when America openly confessed to its long, terrible history of racism. The price paid for that very honorable act was to lose moral authority. And so the loss of moral authority has been a problem for America ever since, white Americans especially. And it's at any given situation, any conflict that comes up, as a Black, I can say, well, you're quoting principle to me now, but you didn't quote principle. You didn't act out that way when I was growing up in segregation. And so I have a moral authority that white Americans don't have, and it constitutes power.
Mm-hmm.
And this, it is, white guilt is an enormous, I think, obviously, very underrated power in American life. It determines any number of things, our attitudes toward race and so forth. Whites have been in the position since the 60s of having to demonstrate in some way their innocence of that old racist past. I'm not me. My unit, it's sort of branding. It's come down to that. You know, my institution is, we have diversity, we have inclusion, we have all these wonderful things today, and because we're innocent of that, and therefore we deserve the moral authority to be seen as a legitimate American institution. So the very legitimacy of our institutions are tied to this accusation against America. One can even, I think, go a little broader. I think it also, the same dynamic is at work in European countries as well, as they face the problem of their former colonies immigrating to their societies.
Mm-hmm. One of the elements of this that's taken on a new importance in our current discussion is the rise of woke members of society. At least it's kind of a poorly defined term, but one of the things that seems to come with it is caring a lot about an appearance of righteousness, as opposed to caring about what actually helps individuals. How is that playing out in this current dynamic in America?
Well, again, it is a predetermined preoccupation with innocence.
Mm-hmm.
Innocence.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.